Welcome to Eureka. It's a program dedicated to scientists. Scientists who have excelled. Scientists who have built the country. Scientists who have contributed to the pool of knowledge that is called science. Today we have Dr. R C Budhani with us. Dr. Budhani, you head National Physical Laboratory of the country.
That's right.
This National Physical Laboratory has a history which is extremely fascinating. A history which starts almost with the freedom
That's right.
of the country. The foundation stone was laid by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. The inauguration of the laboratory was done by Sardar Patel. And the giants in the field of politics, in the field of science, they came and paid homage at that time, including J.D. Bernal,
Sure.
who came there. And then this chair of director was occupied by as big a giant as Dr. Krishnan,
Yes.
who was a student of Sir C.V. Raman. Now, when you first sat on that chair, how did you feel?
Well, it was with a lot of excitement, but also with a lot of responsibility.
Of course.
Because once you have a position occupied by people of the stature of Sir K.S. Krishnan and the mandate of the laboratory, NPL happens to be India's very first publicly funded research institution for physical sciences. And most of the physics in the beginning started at NPL, and it has a huge mandate. It's not only just research in physical sciences, but also to do a major responsibility for the nation, that is to keep the standards of measurements. If you look at the mandate given to the organization at the time of its inception, it clearly says to establish, maintain, and upgrade the national standards of measurements continuously by research.
Dr. S.S. Bhatnagar, right from the beginning, had a dream of two laboratories initially.
That's right, yeah.
One was National Physical Laboratory and the other one was National Chemical Laboratory. And this dream he saw when he was himself almost a newcomer to science. After completing his PhD, he came back to India and he was looking for opportunity, and then DSIR was created, then Council of Scientific and Industrial Research was created by British government, and he started moving on those lines. It was established in Calcutta, and then it was shifted to Delhi, and all those things happened. But when he saw this dream, why do you think that he was very clear that physics and chemistry are going to be the two pillars of development of science in the country?
See, at that time, during that era, physics was actually blooming. You know, there was a transition from the classical physics to quantum physics, and new theories were coming up, new inventions were being made in the area of physical sciences.
He belonged to chemistry.
He was a chemist.
He was a chemist.
Actually, he got his PhD from the UK, and then he was a professor at Banaras Hindu University, and then he became a professor at Punjab University, Lahore.
Right.
And then he was given this responsibility of establishing CSIR. So that was done. It is very surprising. You know, it was done in the midst of Second World War.
Absolutely.
To be exact, our umbrella organization CSIR was founded on 26th of September 1942. And at that time, it was his vision to create a network of institutions all across the length and breadth of this country to work in the areas of physical, chemical, engineering, and biological sciences. And he started with chemistry and physics. So the first laboratory, the National Physical Laboratory, came up here in Delhi on 4th of January 1947. And NCL, National Chemical Laboratory in Pune, I think was done just around the same time.
Yeah, same time.
And the lab started actually functioning from Delhi University campus.
Right.
While this building was being made, and the building was inaugurated in 1950, just I think 5 days before we became a republic.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned, who came for the inaugural function. It's very remarkable. You had the last Governor General of India, and then Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the Deputy Prime Minister, Pandit Nehru. We have a picture of that.
Right.
The inaugural function is really remarkable.
It was remarkable at that time. But these visionaries, when they started creating India, they also started creating some kind of institutionalization of science in the country.
Sure.
Because before that, the institutions were very weak. And they were subservient to the foreign powers.
Yeah.
But this is the vision which created science. So how do you look at the science that has been done, and what kind of future do you see for physics especially?
Now, I think I must say it was a grand vision of Sir S. Bhatnagar combined with then Prime Minister Pandit Nehru to create this network of institutions all over the country, not only research laboratories, also academic institutions like IITs also came around about 5-6 years later. And the role of physics still remains very important. You look at the new boundaries that are being drawn and the entire universe is there to be explored. So it was an exciting field of research. It still remains an exciting field of research. What has happened during the last few decades is you cannot actually compartmentalize science. Now the interdisciplinary component is becoming very, very important. For example, in physics, you have biophysics. You need chemists, you need very good biologists, you need medical doctors, you need physicists to attack a fundamental problem in biology. Similarly, in materials, in energy, you take any aspect. Interdisciplinarity has become so important now, and people have to learn to work with each other, appreciate each other's field of expertise, and then only the science will progress. So this compartmentalization, I think, has to slowly disappear.
You require lots of research, needs to ask questions,
Yes.
and answer and upgrade and be with the international community. I was interested in knowing whether our new generation is as sensitive towards these standards and the limits that we were talking about as the old generation was. How do you look at the new generation?
There is a issue of enlightening the new generation about the importance of these precision measurements and how difficult these are to perform. I would like to tell the audience through you that the large number of Nobel Prizes which have been given over the last 100 years, a major fraction of those have gone to people who came up with newer ways of measuring things with the best precision. So you take, for example, last 10-15 years, about 12 or 13 people have received Nobel Prize in limiting or in measuring time with the greatest possible precision. Today, people can measure time with a precision of 10 raised to the power minus 18 second. And we have a program.
10 raised to the power minus 18 would mean 1 divided by 19 zeros.
Yes.
1 divided by...
That means, I can put it in a very simple words, that means if you have a clock which has this kind of certainty in measurement of time, this clock will lose or go ahead by 1 second in 3 billion years. So, that's the
that
size
is the
of clock.
precision that we are talking about.
Exactly.
And it cannot be done without fundamental research, without basic research and multidisciplinary research, as you said. We will continue our discussion. We have to take a break. Don't go anywhere. The discussion continues. We'll come back with Eureka. Welcome back to Eureka. Dr. Budhani is with us, and we were talking about the future of physics in the country. Dr. Budhani, magnetism, superconductivity, and also electronic transport in two-dimensional structures.
Yes.
That's been your focus area of research and your specialization. Not that I do understand magnetism or superconductivity or two-dimensional structures. Could you explain to our viewers what these terms mean?
Well, let me start with superconductivity, because this is one of the most
At one
fascinating
point of time,
phenomena.
superconductivity was the most promising thing in the world,
Yes,
probably.
it is still.
And NPL claimed a lot of things at that time that we have achieved superconductivity at normal temperature. Would you like to explain?
Well, the phenomenon of superconductivity, if you take any material, particularly metals like copper, for example, you pass a current through it and it offers you a resistance. And that's how, when you have the heaters, that's how heaters glow, because there's some energy dissipated in the wire and that gives you the heat. But there are certain class of materials which lose their resistance completely to the flow of electrical current. And that
certain conditions.
you have to cool it down. So when you go below the ambient temperature roughly about 300 Kelvin, keep cooling them down, and at very low temperatures, you will see that all of a sudden the resistance disappears. And then if you keep on increasing the current through the material, it will remain in the zero resistance state up to a limit. And if you keep pushing the current more and more, eventually a stage will come when the material will become normal, resistive material. So that threshold, that critical value of current is called the critical current of that particular superconductor. Now in the superconducting state, if the material can carry current without any dissipation, without any loss, it's a very fantastic thing because you can then think of a large number of applications of that. There is something else happens with that which is much more fundamental, and that is called the flux expulsion. So when a material goes in the superconducting state, if there is some magnetic field inside, it is pushed out. It does not like magnetic field in the interior of its body. So these two characteristic properties, the zero resistance state and flux expulsion, they sort of define superconductivity. And there are large number of applications now which people are sort of planning to have. For example, motors, you can have power transmission lines, you can have levitation trains, which will be based on this new class of materials. Unfortunately, I would like to mention this here. See, when these materials were discovered in 1987, 86, 87 time frame, the government of India also put in a huge amount of money. Initial push from the government was significant, I must say. But then slowly it just died. But other countries, if you go to the United States or Europe and Japan, they did not give up. And in the US and Japan now, there are superconducting wires and cables, power transmission lines, superconducting magnets made out of this new class of material.
See, there have been new initiatives within NPL. Would you like to talk about them?
Currently, as I said, our primary mandate is standards. So about 40% of our scientists are engaged in designing and improving the national standards of measurements. And when you talk about different parameters that we measure, there are 7 base units. I'll describe those to you. You have length, mass, and time. Then you have temperature. Then you have electrical current ampere. Then you have intensity of light candela. And then you have amount of substance mole. These are 7 base units, which any National Meteorology Institute of a country is supposed to have, the primary standards of these 7 base units. And today, there was a time about 30 years ago, most of these 7 base units were based on artifacts. You had an artifact 1 meter bar, you had a kilogram, or you had a cell which was giving you a constant voltage, so that became a voltage standard. Or you have 2 parallel current carrying wires, you measure the force between them, and depending on what current you are flowing, the force will vary, and that will define the ampere. But now the push is to have all the standards based on the fundamental laws of physics, and all the units must be expressible in terms of the fundamental constants like the Planck's constant, speed of light in vacuum, electronic charge.
So tomorrow you are not going to have 1 kilogram sitting there.
That's right.
And then you measure another kilogram with this standard.
So there will be a new standard where the definition will be based on fundamental constants. And with that, your standard will become invariant of space and time. Whether you are measuring at NPL or you are measuring somewhere in Africa or you are measuring in Canada, it wouldn't matter. It won't depend on your geographical conditions. It will not depend on your environmental.
Which is extremely important. But
And,
you were talking about
also very challenging.
initiative.
It's very challenging because you have to look at some very fundamental physical properties and then express this particular quantity in terms of these fundamental constants.
But what are the new initiatives in the area of solar energy and
we have our umbrella organization, the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, has launched an initiative for harvesting solar energy, and we have given it a name. We call it Tap Sun. And,
fascinating name.
Yes. This is technology and applications of solar energy through networking. That's what. And there are about 14 CSIR laboratories involved in this initiative, and NPL is playing a major role, particularly in the area of solar cells, photovoltaics. And you'll be surprised to know that the photovoltaic research actually in this country started at NPL in the 60s.
It did.
In the 60s. We made crystalline silicon solar cells with an efficiency of about 10%. And that technology was transferred to public sector undertaking, Central Electronics Limited in Saibabad. Yes. And if you go to Saibabad, you still see those panels made at that time, and they still work.
Yes.
So now our objective here is to continue with that area.
Today we have about 35% efficiency.
Well, it varies, depends on the technology you are using. As I said, there are 4 generations of solar cells now. The very first generation is the crystalline silicon one. Then is the generation 2 based on inorganic thin films like silicon or cadmium telluride or CIGS and all inorganic compounds. The third generation is based on organic materials. And these cells can be flexible. You can fold it. You can put them on your window or on the walls of the buildings and so on and so forth. And the final one is most advanced. It is called a hybrid technology, which combines quantum dots, inorganic quantum dots, with organic materials. That seems to be very promising now for future because it requires only ambient temperature processing. On the other hand, when you deal with crystalline silicon,
that will revolutionize the production process.
Absolutely. So that's why the push is, so that you can simply paint these solar cells
on a wall, and then you get the current.
So we have these 4 programs at NPL. We are trying our best to make them. And also we have to have national standards of measurement for solar cells. So far in the country, there is no such facility. There is no calibration facility for solar cells. I know people can claim all kinds of efficiencies, 15%, 20%, 35%, right?
But somebody has to give
Somebody has to give the certificate. And that certificate has to be internationally
Acceptable.
valid, acceptable. And that mandate is given to an NPL, so we have to set up those facilities. We are in the process of doing that. And hopefully, a couple of years down the road, we will have a solar cell characterization and sterilization facility here at NPL.
The first helium liquefier was constructed during Krishnan's time, Dr. Krishnan's time. You have done something new to it.
Yes.
Would you like to?
That's a very fascinating, I would say, aspect of research at NPL. This first helium liquefier, which was set up during Professor Krishnan's time, there was a gentleman, professor at Cambridge, Professor Schoenberg. He came and he spent one full year at NPL, 1951-52, and he set up that plant. And that's how the low temperature research in this country started. The beginning was at NPL. And then over the time, somehow the low temperature physics was not being given enough importance, or there must have been some circumstances. So me, being a low temperature physicist, when I joined, I thought I must revive this facility. So I went to the then Director General, Professor Brahmachari, and I told him that, this is a sort of, NPL history sort of depends on it. And it's a very important facility because the entire quantum metrology program, quantum electrical metrology program requires liquid helium. And he sort of gave a green signal, and we have created a new plant now, a new facility, which is producing something like 70 liters an hour liquid helium.
Mm-hmm.
So we have now set up a large number of new experiments. For example, we have a quantum Hall resistance standard.
Right.
We have Josephson voltage,
Very impressive facility.
voltage standard. We have very recently, and in fact it was installed only a week ago, we have the first dilution refrigerator.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'll explain to you what the dilution refrigerator is. It allows you to go to very, very low temperatures. We can go down to 10 millikelvin. That is 1,000th of a Kelvin.
It is mind-boggling temperature that we are talking about.
10 millikelvin, that would make is 1/100th of a Kelvin.
Right.
So that is the lowest temperature we can achieve at NPL now.
And anybody can achieve just 0 degrees Kelvin.
That is not possible.
That is not possible.
Yeah, that is not
So
possible.
we are very close to that.
People have gone
Yeah.
down to microkelvin. People have set records. For example, I think the lowest temperature record is with Finland. They have gone down to few microkelvins.
So operating on those limits
exactly,
also pushes boundaries gradually.
Because whenever you do an experiment at a certain temperature T, you always have this background noise coming because of the thermal energy at that temperature. Right. So if you want to get rid of all that background noise, you have to go down in temperature. Then things become absolutely calm. There is no noise coming from anywhere. Then you can look at the fundamental physics.
How many scientists are working, the total number of scientists in your institute?
The total strength at NPL today is about 200 scientists. And we have nearly the same number of technical officers, technical staff. And in the last 3 years, we have increased the number of students at NPL. Today now, including PhDs, postdoctoral, and research assistants, all combined, we have roughly about 250 students. So
more than the number of scientists.
Yes, the campus is now actually bubbling with activity.
Thriving.
Yes, and you can even walk in on a weekend and you will see people running around doing their works in the lab. So that's very exciting to see.
Oh, that brings me to my last question. What would be your message to the younger generation?
My simple message to students, and that I keep telling them at NPL, is you must believe in yourself and you must work hard. Because there are no shortcuts in life. Unless
no
you
shortcuts in science.
Anywhere, if you want to excel, anywhere you want to excel in an honest way, there are no shortcuts. You have to sweat it out. And you have to have certain objectives, certain goals, and work for those goals. If you do that, I think success is bound to come. So that's my very simple sort of message to students. Just stay committed, focused, be creative in life. Whatever you do, even if you are not doing science, if you are doing something else, creativity is the essence of life, in my opinion. You must be creative.
Creativity is the essence of life, but you have to work hard. Only creativity will not work. That is what Dr. Budhani says. We'll be back with Eureka and a new scientist next week. Keep watching Eureka week after week. Goodbye.